All right, so welcome to this question on the topic of vectors. Tricky question. Let's see if we can solve this. All right. The question says there are three forces which diagram gives the resultant of three forces to be zero. All right. Now, if you notice, these three forces are organized in the way of a triangle. Okay, and again this is force addition, which means the concept is vector addition. Okay, generally if you have two forces, one force in this direction, say 5 newtons, and the other in the opposite direction, maybe minus 5 newtons, the resultant is 5 minus 5 is equal to 0. Now this was no brainer, right? This was straightforward. How do you handle the situations in which you have more than one force? All right, more than two forces actually. Let's think through this. Okay, if you notice, the triangle number 1 is force 1, and then there is a force 2. Okay, and of course they've drawn a force 3. But if you think logically, force 1 and force 2, if you use the vector addition law, which is the law of triangle used for vector addition, what does it tell you? It tells you if you have two sides of a triangle, the third side represents the resultant. Now if you notice these two, this is the resultant. Okay, the tail, the head, and then a tail, and then the head, and then the resultant starts from the tail of F1 and the head ends at the head of F2. That's the way you make use of the resultant. Okay, if you notice, this is F1 and F2, and if I draw another force like this, this force is more or less can be F1 plus F2 from the vector algebra. The third side drawn in a particular manner, which I just explained you, tail to head and head to tail, gives you the resultant. So in the figure number A, F3 is a resultant of F1 and F2. And there is no way you can organize these three forces to get a 0. How do you organize three forces to get a 0? We will discuss that. But I used one logic, which is the law of triangle of vector addition. And what I saw was that the third side is actually the resultant. And really the resultant doesn't make all the three forces to be 0. It doesn't, right? If 2 newtons plus 3 newtons is equal to 5 newton, okay, the resultant coupled with another one of the same magnitude will not make it 0. So the resultant of F1 and F2 is F3, and the third force is also F3. The resultant is going to be 2F3. Right? I hope you get it. Again, you have force 1 and then you have force 2. The resultant of these two forces is F1 plus F2. F1 plus F2. And this force, by the way, is nothing but the third force being given in the question. There are three questions, right? Three forces. Which means along this line, you will have a resultant of F1 plus F2 and the third force, which is F3, which means this line is going to be 2 times of F3. Let's go to the second one. If this is your F1, this is your F2, the resultant of these two is going to be this. Or this looks close, right? Because if the resultant is F1 plus F2, the third force is opposite to this, right? Exactly identical. So this is minus of F1 plus F2. Of course, the third force, which is F3, which is in the right hand direction, will cancel this force, right? So the resultant of F1 and F2 is rightward, and the third force given in the question, which is the third side of the triangle, is in the opposite direction. So you do get a 0 actually. Now let's talk about the diagram number 3. If you see the diagram number 3, and if I were to use, this is my force, maybe 3, I've been calling it 3. This is F1. The sum of these two, F3 plus F1, is this force, right? So the resultant of F1 and F3 is F2, and then on top of that there is a third force which is also the same force, right, which is shown in the diagram. So the resultant I have calculated using my knowledge of vectors, and then the third one is also in the line with the resultant of F1 and F3. So this actually becomes 2 times F2, or 2 times F1 plus F2. Cannot be 0, because the third force is in the same direction as the direction of F1 plus F3. Let's talk about this one. Alright, let's look into this F1, and this is F2. If you add these two, that's the resultant will be this, right? But in our case, this is also the third side. So that means the resultant of the two forces F1 plus F2 will get added to the third force, giving the same one, because it is on the same side, 2F3. So the only logic where you get a 0 force because of 3 is this, right? I hope this is making sense to you. You need to be good in vectors to be able to solve physics. If you're not good in vectors, please watch my playlist. I think it's called Vectors for Physics or Maths for Physics. Go and check it out and learn some vectors. Vector addition is the foundation of the knowledge you need to solve the physics questions, right? Especially in advanced level IB board, AP physics, or be it NEET examination or JEE Mains. So do practice vectors to be able to solve similar problems. I hope you like this and the discussion part of it. Now I've gone to great extent in explaining this. Thank you very much for your time, and wait for my next video.